It all started with an audacious act of overreach, one that defied reason and legality. One morning, the farm owner awoke to an unfamiliar sight at the entrance to their property. A large, professionally made sign, complete with the HOA's emblem, announcing that the land had been designated as a public community farm and petting zoo. The words stood bold and official, as if the decision had been made by a governing body with the rightful authority to dictate the land's purpose. But no such authority existed. The farm was private property, a legally owned and carefully maintained agricultural estate, cultivated over years of hard work and dedication. Yet here it stood, a declaration to the world that strangers were free to roam, explore, and take what they pleased. The farm owner was dumbfounded. Who had approved this? Who had the audacity to trespass onto their land and plant this blatant lie? The culprit wasn't difficult to identify. Diane Thompson, the head of the HOA, had long been vocal about her disapproval of the farm. She viewed it as an eyesore in the otherwise pristine, cookie-cutter neighborhood. But her true motives weren't about aesthetics, they were about control. She saw the farm as an untapped resource, a commodity she could exploit for personal gain. The sign was just the beginning, the impact was immediate. Within hours of the sign's appearance, strangers began trickling onto the farm. At first, it was just a few curious passers-by, peering through the fence, snapping photos of the lush produce and the rustic charm of the property. Then, as word spread, the trickle turned into a flood. Families arrived with picnic baskets, assuming the farm was open for leisurely afternoons among the crops and livestock. Children ran through the rows of vegetables, trampling delicate plants, while parents picked fresh tomatoes straight from the vines as if they were at a grocery store with an unlimited free sample policy. Teenagers treated the barn as a backdrop for their social media posts, climbing onto hay bales and taking selfies with the goats. The farm owner confronted them, demanding to know why they were on private property. The answer was always the same: the sign said this was a public community farm. Confusion gave way to outrage. The sheer nerve of the HOA, of Diane, to pull such a reckless stunt was beyond comprehension. Worse still, some of the trespassers weren't just tourists looking for a day of fun, they were opportunists. A few people brought baskets and began harvesting produce as if they had a right to it. The owner caught one man stuffing apples into a tote bag and demanded he leave. "What's the problem?" he asked. "This is a community farm. I'm part of the community." It was chaos, and it was escalating fast. Determined to put an end to the madness, the farm owner stormed into the next HOA meeting, demanding an explanation. Diane, seated at the head of the long table with a smug expression, barely feigned surprise. "Oh, is there an issue with the sign?" she asked innocently, though the glint in her eye betrayed her. "We just thought it would be a lovely addition to the community." The farm owner didn't buy the act. "You thought it would be a lovely addition to steal my land and turn it into a free-for-all?" The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but Diane remained unfazed. Now, she said, holding up a perfectly manicured hand. "No one is stealing anything. We're simply enhancing the neighborhood. And frankly, your farm doesn't fit the community's aesthetic. It's unsightly. We could work together to make it something truly special, a destination." The implication was clear. Diane and the HOA wanted control over the farm, and if they couldn't take it outright, they would make life so miserable for the owner that they'd be forced to comply. But Diane wasn't just looking to boost property values or eliminate what she saw as an eyesore. She saw dollar signs. The farm was a valuable asset, and in her mind, it was wasted on a single private owner. She wanted it to be monetized, commercialized, exploited. And to her, the easiest way to achieve that was to bully the owner into submission. As if trespassing and property damage weren't enough, Diane took her scheme one step further. Without the farm owner's knowledge, she began organizing educational farm tours for families, charging each household $15 per visit. Families arrived in groups, led around the property by Diane herself, who acted as if she were the rightful proprietor. She pointed out the various crops, made up stories about the history of the land, and even encouraged children to pick a few vegetables as a souvenir. Meanwhile, the farm owner, completely unaware, continued to deal with the fallout of uninvited guests, trampled plants, and the general chaos inflicted by the HOA's lies. The only reason the scheme was discovered was due to a chance encounter with a frustrated parent. A mother, clutching the hands of two young children, approached the farm owner and asked, "Excuse me, But why did we pay for a tour if you won't even let us inside today? Confused, the owner pressed for details. The mother explained that she had seen an ad on the neighborhood bulletin board about the HOA farm experience. She had eagerly signed up, along with a dozen other families, each paying the HOA directly. But now, the farm was apparently closed, and she wanted a refund. When the farm owner investigated further, the truth became clear. Diane had already collected at least $600 from unauthorized tours. The farm had been turned into an attraction against its owner's will, and Diane was the one profiting from it. As news of the HOA's deception spread, the farm owner faced an unexpected challenge, anger not just at Diane, but at them. Many residents, who had genuinely believed the farm was a community space, were furious when they were suddenly denied access. "Why are you closing it now?" one man asked bitterly. "My kids love coming here." Another woman complained, "I already paid for a tour next weekend. This is unacceptable." The farm owner was at a loss. People were upset, but their anger was misdirected. They had been lied to by Diane, but instead of blaming her, they resented the owner for taking away what they now saw as a public privilege. It was a disaster. The farm owner tried to explain the truth, but misinformation spread faster than facts. Diane, ever the manipulator, seized the moment. "It's such a shame," she lamented to neighbors, shaking her head. "We were trying to do something wonderful for the community, and now someone is ruining it." It was an outright smear campaign, designed to turn the neighborhood against the farm. But Diane had underestimated one thing: the farm owner wasn't going down without a fight. With no other choice, the owner turned to legal documents, the property deeds, the HOA bylaws, anything that could prove, beyond a doubt, that Diane's actions were not just unethical but illegal. And as they dug deeper, they found exactly what they needed: a way to take Diane down. Furious but determined, the farm owner spent the next several days poring over legal documents, searching for anything that could discredit Diane and the HOA's overreach. The effort was exhausting, but it wasn't in vain. In the dusty pages of the HOA's original bylaws and property covenants, a pattern of hypocrisy emerged, one that the owner could use against them. The HOA had been weaponizing its rules against the farm, claiming it didn't align with community standards. But the farm owner quickly discovered that many of the HOA board members, including Diane herself, were in blatant violation of those same rules. The president of the HOA had an illegal addition to their home. Another board member's property had an unapproved fence. Diane herself had extended her backyard patio well beyond the limits outlined in the bylaws. These violations weren't minor. They were serious breaches of the same regulations they had tried to enforce on the farm. Armed with this evidence, the farm owner realized they had a powerful weapon. If the HOA wanted to play the rule enforcement game, then it would be played both while digging through the property records. The farm owner also uncovered something even more valuable: proof that the land was part of a designated agricultural heritage zone. This designation, established decades ago, protected farmland from being rezoned or repurposed for non-agricultural use. That meant that the HOA had absolutely no legal authority to demand that the farm conform to its neighborhood aesthetics, nor could it dictate how the land was used. The discovery was a game-changer. Diane had been operating under the assumption that she could push the farm owner into submission, but this legal protection rendered all her arguments baseless. The farm owner wasted no time in preparing a defense. Copies of the zoning laws were printed, highlighted, and placed into an ever-growing file of legal evidence. With this information, they could take the fight to the HOA and prove, once and for all, that the farm wasn't just protected, it was untouchable. But the farm wasn't just a legal entity, it was an essential part of the community's economy. For years, it had been quietly supplying 60% of the fresh produce used by local businesses, including restaurants, grocery stores, and farmers markets. Many residents had no idea just how vital the farm was to their daily lives. They enjoyed farm-to-table meals at local restaurants, purchased fresh vegetables at the grocery store, and never once questioned where those ingredients came from. The farm owner knew that if people truly understood what was at stake, they wouldn't just oppose the HOA's actions, they would actively fight against them. So, the owner reached out to business partners who relied on the farm's produce. Sam Garcia, the owner of a popular family restaurant, and Jessica Martinez, a grocery store manager, were among the first to step forward. Both were horrified when they learned what the HOA was trying to do. If the farm was forced to shut down or be repurposed, their businesses would suffer immensely. Sam and Jessica agreed to speak out at the next HOA meeting, ready to make it clear that the farm was not just a personal property issue. It was a community survival. The next HOA meeting was a spectacle. The farm owner arrived with their stack of documents, business owners in tow, and a determination to set the record straight. Diane, sensing the tension in the room, attempted to start the meeting as if nothing was wrong, but the farm owner immediately took the floor. "You've lied to the community. You've broken laws. You've trespassed on private property. And now I have proof." The room fell silent. The owner laid out everything: the unauthorized sign, the illegal tours, the HOA's own rule violations, and, most importantly, the agricultural zoning protections that completely invalidated Diane's claims. As the owner spoke, Sam Garcia stood up and addressed the crowd. "Do you know where your food comes from?" he asked, his voice carrying through the packed meeting hall. "Half of the fresh produce you eat comes from that farm. If Diane gets her way, that all disappears." Jessica Martinez followed, explaining how the local grocery store depended on the farm for fresh stock. The realization swept over the crowd like a wave. What had started as a petty HOA squabble had suddenly become a threat to the entire community's food supply. People weren't just listening, they were getting angry. Faced with undeniable proof that she was on the wrong side of the law and the community, Diane's carefully crafted facade began to crack. She scrambled to justify her actions, claiming that her only intent had been to create a better community experience. But the farm owner wasn't done yet. There was one final revelation. Michael, Diane's husband, had approached the farm owner earlier that week with a so-called partnership proposal. On the surface, it appeared to be an olive branch, a chance for the owner to compromise and allow some level of HOA involvement with the farm. But buried in the fine print was a hidden clause that would transfer the farm's developmental rights to the HOA. If signed, Diane and her board would have gained the power to rezone and sell the land to developers. In other words, it had never been about community improvements or aesthetics. Diane had wanted to seize control of the farm and sell it off for profit. When the farm owner revealed this information, the outrage in the room was palpable. The same residents who had once believed Diane's lies now turned against her. The scheme had been exposed for what it was, a blatant land grab, fueled by greed. But even as Diane's influence crumbled, the battle wasn't over. She wasn't the type to go down quietly. And the farm owner knew that as long as Diane and the HOA still had power, they would continue scheming. The fight for the farm was far from finished. Just when it seemed Diane had run out of ways to attack the farm, things took a darker turn. One morning, the farm owner woke up to the sound of frantic clucking and scattered feathers. Rushing outside, they found the chicken coop had been sabotaged. Someone had deliberately cut through the wire fencing, allowing the hens to escape into the fields. It wasn't just an accident. The precision of the cut, the way the fencing had been pulled back, it was deliberate, an act meant to send a message. It took hours to gather the chickens, some of which had wandered into the nearby woods. The damage was more than just lost time. The stress of the event affected egg production, and some of the more vulnerable birds had been injured in the chaos. Whoever did this wanted to hurt the farm, not just legally, but physically. There were no witnesses, no clear evidence pointing to a suspect, but the farm owner had no doubts about who was responsible. Diane and her inner circle had realized they were losing their grip on the situation. And like any cornered predator, they were getting desperate. This wasn't just a legal fight anymore. It was a battle of intimidation. As the farm owner was still dealing with the aftermath of the sabotage, Michael Thompson, Diane's husband, arrived at the farm with an offer. He wasn't smug or aggressive like Diane. He played the role of the reasonable businessman, trying to spin the situation as a misunderstanding. "Look," Michael said, hands raised as if in surrender, "this whole thing's gotten out of hand. I get it. But there's a way we can fix this." He presented a business proposal, one that would, officially, make the farm part of the community while still allowing the owner to operate it. It sounded diplomatic, even generous. But the farm owner knew better than to take anything at face value. When they sat down to read through the document later that night, the truth became clear. The partnership was a trap. Hidden in the fine print was a development rights transfer clause, which would give the HOA control over how the land could be used in the future. If signed, the farm owner would no longer have the power to stop rezoning efforts. Diane and the HOA could sell the farm to developers whenever they pleased. The entire battle, the trespassing, the fake sign, the illegal tours, the sabotage, had all been leading up to this moment. Diane's goal had never been to improve the farm for the community. She wanted to seize it, flip it, and profit. The farm owner had suspected as much, but now they had concrete proof. Armed with this new revelation, the farm owner wasted no time in making it public. At the next community gathering, they revealed everything. The sabotage, the illegal tours, the financial exploitation of families, and finally, the proof that Diane was trying to sell the land from under everyone's noses. The crowd reaction was immediate. People were furious. Many residents had once supported Diane, trusting that she had the community's best interests at heart. But now they saw the truth. Families who had paid for tours were outraged to learn their money had gone straight into Diane's pockets. Local businesses, who had only just realized how much they relied on the farm's produce, rallied behind the owner. Even some of Diane's former allies on the HOA board began to distance themselves from her, sensing the shift in public opinion. Diane tried to defend herself, but the more she spoke, the more obvious her guilt became. The power she had once held over the neighborhood was crumbling. But even as her influence waned, the farm owner knew better than to assume the fight was over. With overwhelming community support and a mountain of legal evidence, the farm owner took the next step, official legal action. They contacted an attorney, who helped draft a cease and desist order against Diane and the HOA. The order demanded the immediate removal of the unauthorized sign, a stop to all trespassing, and a full refund to any residents who had been tricked into paying for farm tours. It also formally accused the HOA of harassment, trespassing, and financial exploitation. Diane and the HOA board were served the papers in full view of the community. The moment was satisfying, but it was far from the final blow. The farm owner's attorney also hinted at a potential lawsuit, one that could seek damages for lost revenue, property destruction, and emotional distress. The HOA's legal standing was crumbling. If they didn't back off, they were about to face a far bigger fight than they had anticipated. Just when it seemed things couldn't get any worse for Diane, an unexpected figure stepped forward, Eleanor Williams, a longtime resident and former HOA board member. Eleanor had been around since the neighborhood was first established and had something Diane didn't: historical knowledge of the original HOA covenant. She approached the farm owner after the meeting, holding an old, leather-bound binder. "I think you might find this useful," she said with a knowing smile. Inside the binder was a copy of the original HOA agreement, signed decades ago. And buried within its pages was something Diane had either overlooked or hoped no one would ever find: a clause protecting all agricultural land from HOA interference. The language was clear: any property zoned for agriculture was exempt from HOA rules and regulations. This wasn't just legal leverage, it was checkmate. The farm had been untouchable from the start. Diane's entire crusade had been built on a lie. She had either failed to do her research or had deliberately ignored the covenant, hoping no one would notice. Either way, the consequences were the same. With this final piece of evidence, the farm owner now had an airtight case against Diane and the HOA. And this time, there was no way for them to escape accountability. The revelation of the original HOA covenant shattered any remaining support Diane had left. Residents were stunned. Many of them had followed Diane's lead, believing she was enforcing legitimate community standards. But now, with Eleanor's historical documents proving that the farm was never under HOA jurisdiction, they realized the entire ordeal had been built on deception. At the next HOA meeting, the tension was suffocating. Diane sat stiffly at the head of the room, her usual smug confidence absent. The farm owner arrived with their attorney, holding a stack of documents: the cease and desist order, evidence of trespassing, financial exploitation, and, of course, the original covenant that invalidated every argument Diane had made. One by one, residents stood up and demanded answers. "You lied to us. You stole money from families. You tried to sell land that wasn't yours." Some even called for Diane's immediate removal from the HOA board. Michael, her husband, sat silently, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. He knew what was coming next. The HOA board, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, held an emergency vote right then and there. By an overwhelming majority, Diane was stripped of her position as HOA president. But that wasn't all. Facing the possibility of a lawsuit and legal repercussions, the remaining board members had little choice but to concede. The HOA officially rescinded all claims against the farm, acknowledging that they had no authority over the property. It was a decisive victory. But even as Diane was removed from power, the farm owner knew she wouldn't give up quietly. With Diane's reputation in ruins and the HOA distancing itself from her, Michael Thompson was left scrambling. His restaurant, which had thrived thanks to the farm's fresh produce, was now in jeopardy. News of his involvement in Diane's schemes had spread, and customers were starting to boycott. Facing mounting pressure, Michael swallowed his pride and approached the farm owner. This time, there was no fake diplomacy, no hidden clauses in a contract. He was desperate. "I had nothing to do with Diane's plan to sell the farm," he insisted. "I just want to save my business." The farm owner listened, but their patience was thin. After everything Diane had done, the illegal sign, the trespassing, the sabotage, why should they help him? Michael had an answer. He wasn't asking for special treatment. Instead, he offered to publicly denounce Diane's actions and testify that she had orchestrated the entire scheme. It was a tempting offer. If Michael went public, it would be the final nail in Diane's coffin. It would also protect the farm from any future HOA interference, as no one would dare to try something like this again. But could Michael be trusted? The farm owner had a choice to make: accept his deal and use his confession as a weapon, or refuse and let his business crumble as Diane's influence finally coalesce. While the legal and public battles were wrapping up, one lingering mystery remained: the sabotage of the chicken coop. It was easy to assume Diane was behind it, but there was no direct proof. And even though Diane had lost her power, the farm owner couldn't ignore the fact that someone had deliberately tried to harm the farm. So, they set out to investigate. After speaking with neighbors and checking security footage, a new suspect emerged, one of Diane's most loyal HOA supporters. A man named Greg Winters, a longtime resident and vocal opponent of the farm, had been seen near the property the night before the sabotage. Greg had always been one of Diane's loudest defenders, backing every one of her decisions without question. And when the community had turned against Diane, Greg had vanished from public view. The farm owner confronted him, demanding answers. Greg denied everything. But when they warned that police were getting involved, his composure cracked. He admitted to cutting the fence on Diane's orders. The sabotage hadn't just been about scaring the farm owner, it had been a test to see how much damage could be done. If things had gone according to plan, Diane had intended to escalate further, potentially framing the farm as a hazard to force legal action. With Greg's confession in hand, the farm owner finally had proof that Diane had crossed the line into criminal behavior. The evidence was handed over to law enforcement. Despite losing her HOA position, despite Michael's betrayal, and despite the police involvement, Diane refused to back down completely. She still had allies, few, but loyal. And she still had money. So, she did what she always did: she schemed. Diane hired a lawyer and attempted to sue the farm owner, claiming defamation and harassment. It was a ridiculous case, built on nothing but bitterness and desperation. But Diane didn't care about winning. She wanted to drain the farm owner's resources, to make the legal fight exhausting and expensive. She wanted revenge. But Diane underestimated just how much the community had turned against her. When news of her lawsuit spread, local business owners banded together to offer financial support to the farm owner. The farm had fed their families, sustained their businesses, and kept the community strong. They weren't going to let Diane destroy it. Fundraisers were held. Donations poured in. And just like that, Diane's legal attack backfired. Instead of draining the farm owner's resources, she had ignited a movement that solidified the farm's place in the community forever. With Diane's lawsuit dismissed and her reputation in shambles, the battle seemed over. But the farm owner knew better. Diane and Michael weren't the type to accept defeat gracefully. They still had money. They still had connections. And they still wanted control. Even as the farm celebrated its victory, whispers spread that the Thompsons were looking for new ways to strike back. Whether it was through shady land deals, legal loopholes, or underhanded tactics, the war for the farm wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. The farm owner had won this round, but they had to remain vigilant. Because as long as people like Diane existed, there would always be another battle to fight. And next time, the stakes could be even higher.